Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White. Super thrilled to be here with you this week. I hope that you have had a fabulous week. I hope things are working out for you, that you're having great connections, and that you are looking forward to a fabulous weekend. With that said, I want to first make some announcements before we get started in our show. Okay, so first things first. You are wanting to be featured on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast, you'll see my banner below, or you're interested in scheduling a consultation with me, feel free to reach out via email at india.white.123@gmail.com so that we can get you squared away, you can get on the show, and we can continue to stay connected. Next, I want to let you guys know that the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on X Factor EDU Network, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph, and it can be found on Spotify. So tune in. Thank you so much for the fabulous sponsors and for all of the support in the tribe, the X Factor EDU tribe. Also, when you get a chance, check out the X Factor EDU Network. Check out the website. There are so many different opportunities for you to connect with other leaders and to read books and to be a part of various leadership opportunities, different podcasts and whatnot. I'm telling you, there's a plethora of great knowledge and wealth of information on the website. So take a stab at it, go look at it, check it out, support us. We're here for you. So with that said, I also wanted to encourage you to please follow me on social media. So my Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. That's the DR, right? So I hope, and thank you for those that have been following and have been tuning in and have been faithful. I love y'all so much. You're wonderful. And so, yeah, so those are my social media accounts for you. Also, if you're interested regarding this podcast, what it's all about, again, if you are trying to close the achievement gap, but you're having classroom management issues, or if your students just aren't motivated to do the work, then this is the perfect podcast for you. So it's definitely my hope, my prayer that you will be able to get everything that you need in regards to helping your students into being successful. So with that said, I want to now share with you guys some updates so that you can mark your calendar regarding my ability to come out and to support you guys as a speaker and things like that. And so I want to share with you really quickly another update. So I have a couple of upcoming events. I'm so honored for the past event I was just able to do in Maryland with these phenomenal doctors across the nation and EMS leaders, wonderful, wonderful people. And so this upcoming week, next week, I will be working with California school districts throughout California. There's various school districts. I'll be doing some grit and numeracy workshops. So I'm looking forward to connecting with you leaders down there, and let's talk about some grit because I'm excited. Also, I will be speaking with a plethora of rock stars at the CMC Central Conference in Bakersfield, California on March 8th and March 9th. So make sure you can come down and join us if you're in the area. I personally will be speaking March 9th at like 1:10 or something like that. So stop by at 1 o'clock. I am giving away prizes at my sessions. So I'm looking forward to seeing y'all on the West Coast. We're going to have a blast. And so today I want to talk with you on this episode about really developing grit in students, but more than just developing grit, I want to talk about empowering students and empowering student voice. Again, we're going to talk about empowering student voice through grit and also through just relationship building with your students, cultural inclusivity, and all of those good things. So why am I bringing this podcast topic to us? First things first, I think many of us educators are seeing across the board that students, especially in the math classroom, they tend to go mute, especially at the beginning. And then when they're returning from break, sometimes they go mute in the math classroom where they don't feel comfortable of expressing their opinion on different parts of the math, or just in engaging in metacognition, engaging in mathematical discourse with their peers in the class. And then it makes things really awkward, and that student kind of becomes a wallflower and blends in with the environment. And so what I want to do is I want to talk with you just from the heart, and also provide some research and some supports out there, and what it says about how we can empower student voice. Because especially in this time, and I know sometimes you get that one student that's always answering the question, those one or two students always raising their hands, always ready to give input. But it's time for us to help to empower student voice of all of our students so that they all can thrive no matter what. So I did some digging, and I found a really cool source that talked about empowering student voice. And she gave some tips. And this was from the article. It was called 10 Ways to Encourage Student Voice. I'm going to pull it up for you in a little bit. But right now, I'm going to just tell you what her tips were, and then we're going to walk through those tips together. All right. So first things first, she talked about empowering student voice. And she said, for the tips of empowering student voice, first thing that you want to do is you want to ask your students, who are you? And not just asking, okay, like, who are you? Like, really intentionally wanting to know. This is by Sean Andres, actually, is who it's by, excuse me. And so, and then there's also a clip on there from an educator that's going to give us some more insight. So I want to first review this, and we're going to go over there, okay? So ask students, who are you? Like, are you really interested in who you are teaching? This is a future leader. Yes. Who are you teaching? You're teaching a doctor. You're teaching a lawyer. You're teaching a teacher. You're teaching a businessman, businesswoman, a judge. You're teaching an author. You're teaching a celebrity. You never know. I remember I shared with you guys the last show of one of the celebrities who he made it a point to actually bring his teacher, like shout out his teacher from the audience, because they made such an impact on their lives, on their life. So, you know, that could be you. You don't know who you're teaching, right? All I know is that they're going to grow up and they're going to evolve into wonderful, productive citizens in society, and you're going to have your stamp on that success. So ask them, who are you? The second tip that they gave, that Sean gave, was encouraging under-engaged voices. I thought that was very interesting. Encouraging those voices. And how can you do that? Now, I want you to imagine you're in the classroom, you're teaching, and you see 80% of the students are getting the content, but then you have that student either over in the corner, or the student that even might be in the front or in the middle. They've hidden out. And they're not really contributing to the lesson. You know, they're just being very pleasant in their behavior so that you don't call on them. And then you go home, or you're driving, and then you're like, wait, I don't think I heard from student A. And you start thinking. So I want you to think of that student, the one that's getting lost in the crowd. How can you empower that voice? Encourage them. A way that you can do this, I personally would recommend, is whenever you have a classroom setting, to make sure that you are encouraging student voice by complimenting the voices that have already spoken, but then giving a student a chance to either elaborate on it, or to agree, or to share their thoughts. One thing students hate is when we say, okay, anybody got the answer to that? And then there's like awkward silence, or who can tell me the answer for this one? Who can tell me how to do that one? Who wants to come to the board? You know, like students, that a lot of students, or many students, they might suffer with anxiety. They might not want the attention on them. So when you're asking them these questions, you know, it's making it a little bit uneasy for them at times. And so unless you've really established a classroom procedural norm where you've built up the learning environment to where all students have their vulnerability at a place where they can actually trust you, and they trust their peers, and they know they're not going to look, you know, humiliated or embarrassed or ashamed because they're providing input, even if their input is wrong. Unless you've gotten to that point, it's going to be awkward, socially awkward as well. And so a way that you can help your students with this is definitely by doing it in a way where it's non-biased, and it doesn't look like you're either playing favorites or you're picking on anybody because you're calling on a select few to answer those questions. And so what you can do is you can say, I'm going to call on, I'm going to pull popsicle sticks and one person per group is going to share out. Or you can provide incentives that, if you answer, then you get $20, fake money, or you get whatever the incentives are in your classroom system. If you have a system, or if your school has a PBIS system, you can use some of those incentives as well to motivate the students to want to contribute to the classroom discussion. You can also ask students to all write down, how they feel about something, and then give a little bit of wait time, maybe a couple of, maybe 30 seconds or so, and then go around. And then you can collect responses from a couple of students, including that student that is the wallflower that you're not really hearing much from. So those are some tips that you can do there when you're trying to encourage underengaged voices. Another thing you can consider is to appreciate and lift underrepresented voices. And I think this is key, the way you do it, because yes, you're celebrating them and you're letting them know that they belong. But at the same time, it's really neat because all students want to hear from that student. They want that insight. They want that different perspective. They want to hear it from a different lens. And so this is really great way to take advantage of hearing and having a diverse perspective in the room. Now, they kept going. This rock star, it was amazing. They provided more tips. So tip number 4, they said, make lessons personally relevant. We've talked about this on the show before. I'm not going to get off of this because I know this is so just wonderful. I think right now, if you mentioned to students a couple of names, if you mentioned Taylor Swift, if you mentioned Kobe Bryant, if you mentioned some other big time celebrity in your work, watch their ears perk up. Watch how they are going to respond, because now you're talking their language. If you mention, I dare some of you, do a problem, maybe in your class tomorrow, and you're talking about TikTok. Just write a problem, and maybe it's talking about social media platform, and you're trying to measure something or whatever, and you have a couple of different. Maybe you do a chart. You've got TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, and do a couple of different, and then have them measure which one has, the most people, or the fastest, the fastest feedback or something like that. Make it a problem that's relevant to their everyday. And I promise you, you're going to see such a boost of engagement from your students like never before, because you're speaking their language. Remember, it's about learning how to speak their language in a way that creates buy-in and creates an opportunity for them to feel that it's relevant and to feel like they're wanting to contribute to the lesson. So now, tip 5, give students more time for processing. Again, give them more time for processing. There is nothing wrong with wait time. I know sometimes you feel guilty because you're like, wait, the class is quiet. Like, oh God, it's like kind of awkward, and maybe they're not gonna. And so you want to like contribute, say, okay, let's go to the next problem. But sometimes they need time to process it. And I think the ratio is that for us, like if it takes, as an adult, it might take you 25 minutes to finish a test. Before a student, it might take them an hour, because our processing is so much faster than theirs. So I don't quite remember the ratio, but I do want to say that we process things much faster, obviously. And so we've got to give it a little bit of wait time, because when we're throwing this content at them, this new content, and then we're asking them questions, they've got to process it in their own mind. They've got to process it with their own experience. And then they have to figure out how to say it in a way where their classmates understand them and they don't look awkward and they're not feeling weird. So with that said, they're going to need us to be a little bit more patient in the classroom when you're trying to help them with processing. Now, tip 6, allow for creative expression. And I'll go down to the example I've shared before at conferences and whatnot, where I had a situation in Algebra 2, and we were teaching complex numbers. And long story short, I was telling the students, okay, I to the first is I to the second is -1, I to the third is -I to the fourth is 1. And I just remembered, I said, okay, guys, so that's I, -1, -I, 1. I, -1, -I, 1. Repeat. I, -1, -I, 1. All of a sudden, the students turn it into like a rap. where they started banging on the desk and they made a whole song out of it. And the kids aced the test because they were given a space to have creative expression. Nobody got written up. There were no referrals. Nobody was in trouble. We laughed. We had a blast. And they did great. So give them creative expression. And the cool part about this is sometimes it's going to cause you to get out of your comfort zone as an educator, because you'll be shocked with what that expression is. But they have to have enough room to where they feel that they can express themselves without getting in trouble. Of course, as long as they're not violating, hurting anyone, right? So know your students, know your culture, know your environment, but definitely allow there to be some wiggle room for students to get creative, as long as it's above board and it's fun. Next, tip 7, stretch the imagination. So there's nothing wrong with asking students and challenging students to think twice about this, or to think again, or what else is out there, what else. And when I was studying at the University of Florida for my master's, I had a professor who talked about questioning and different questioning skills, and he was so spot on with this, and it was such an epiphany for me. It's changed my way of work as an educator. And go Gators. And so I remembered he spoke about questioning students and answering their questions with a question, never giving them the response, but always giving them a question. There's a couple of rock stars at UF that do this, and of course nationwide. But I remembered that when I tried this method, it stretched their imagination. So if you're like, well, how do I do that? Whenever students are like, well, is it 15? Is the answer 15? Say, well, you tell me. What do you think? How did you get that? Explain. Why did you come up with 15 and not 14, not 15, or not 17? Have them go into their logical reasoning as to how they're coming up with those answers, so that they don't feel like this is like you're passing a carrot to the rabbit, or you're giving a treat to a doggy or to your cat or whatever, but that they feel like you're actually challenging them, and that they're not going to get the answer from you, but that they have to solve and work through that productive struggle in your classroom. All right, tip 8, nurture curiosity. So this is very, very important to do, but I'm going to tell you that a key to this is making sure that there's relevancy. So point 4 kind of goes with this, making the lesson personally relevant, because if the student doesn't feel like they can connect to it, they're not going to be curious if they can't see it. So, okay, so I had the privilege of teaching my daughter Pythagorean triples. Yes. And Pythagorean theorem. So she's learning Pythagorean theorem right now in school. And she's going over like just finding the areas and all this stuff, and the 3, 4, 5 triangle and all this stuff. So I'm talking to my daughter and my son, because he was, being nosy. So he got a lesson too. So we're talking about, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared is c squared. We're talking about 3, 4, 5 triangles. We're talking about the 1, 1 square root 2, or radical 2. I kept saying radical 2 last night. I kept saying the word radical. They're like, what's radical? I was like, the square root, right? Anyways, so, okay. So I'm telling you this because she, at first, my daughter, she didn't know, like, she wasn't really curious about Pythagorean and finding the hypotenuse and finding the distance and all this. But then when I started explaining to them, like, okay, so they had a problem about a flower bed. And I'm going to be honest, the problem seemed kind of dry in context. Like it was just a regular math problem. This gardener's doing a flower bed and they're trying to build it for something. And I was like, okay, stop, guys. I was like, can you see this? And then I asked them, I was like, can you see it in your head? A guy is building a flower bed. Like, can you see him take out an actual like wooden garden bed thing, and he's like filling it with soil, and he's got his plants on the side, and he's measuring it because he had to measure the flower bed in the problem. And at first my kids are like, no, we can't see it. Like, what are you saying? And I made them stop and see it. And then we began to go over the math, and of course they figured it out. And then I taught them about Pythagorean triples and the trick when you have a 3, 4, 5 triangle, how, you can double it, triple it, times 10, whatever, as long as you know those specific 3, 4, 5 measurements, then you'll always get a 3, 4, 5 triangle. Anyways, I digress. Go math. So So we're talking about this, and I built their curiosity by helping them to see the problem and making it relevant, because I love gardening. I love flowers and soil. I love all that. So if you guys are gardeners out there, whoop, whoop, shout out to you. But that's how I was able to make it relevant for her, which sparked the curiosity. And just like that, you have students who there is a disconnect between the page and their real life, and therefore they can't understand, they can't see it. So, like for instance, if you told me about shoveling snow in a math problem, I can't help you because I've never shoveled snow before. So I can't see it. Like I'm not pictured it, I'm not done it. So it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, yes, I'm older now, so of course I could, but if I was a student, and you're talking to me about shoveling snow and I'm in Florida, I can't help you. So sometimes we literally have to make it so relevant, and we have to draw out examples, pull up a movie, an educational movie on YouTube or on a educational website that goes into depth about those particular topics so that it's relevant for students, so that we can nurture their curiosity. So, and then of course, you want to engage in leadership with students. And I like this because the powerful part is you can expand leadership. And I'm sure they probably wrote on different aspects of this. But when I see this, what I'm thinking of too is empowering student leadership by assigning roles in the classroom. Kagan does wonderful with that. There are other resources, I'm sure. You can say, okay, student A, you're a timekeeper. Student B, you're a note taker. Student C, you're making sure everybody understands. Student D, you're going to answer out, and when the teacher calls on everybody, you're going to be the one to make sure everybody understands it, right? So assigning roles is great. I know in elementary schools, they do the whole role thing, and you have the door holder and all that stuff. It's kind of taking those ideas, but putting them in the classroom and activities in a context to where it's relevant for the students and it's age appropriate. So, and then the last one is providing feedback. And I've spoken about this before, making sure that when you're providing feedback, that it's specific and that it uplifts, that it's not like a negative Nancy kind of thing of like, oh, well, oh goodness, that's all you got for me, or like, but that it's really empowering that student, like, wow, look how much you did here. Look how much, like, oh my gosh, you did a wonderful job. I mean, that's how you get students. When I used to take students that were, either Title I students or, underserved students, at-risk students, whatever. And I'm trying to empower them to be proficient in math. I found many of them didn't even like to read or write. And so there is a correlation there, by the way. And so I remembered that the way I would start it, I would say, okay, I need everybody to write for me at least half a page as to what you learned, explaining vocabulary, explaining a problem, and what it means to you. And at first, oh my word, I would get maybe 2 sentences, maybe some bullet points. But then at the end of that year, students were writing at least a page, and, not just a page front, even a page front and back, explaining how they felt. And I thought that was wonderful. And so it's a process, but I would always start with those baby steps. And I would say, wow, look at you. Oh, you are just doing a fabulous job, and I would praise them and lift them up. That's why we're in the room. We're here to lift these babies. We're here to lift them up. Always remember that. You are here to give. You're here to give love. You're here to lift them. You're here to support them. You're here to empower them. So I want to encourage you to continue to provide praise in the feedback, as well as next steps so that they can, remain proficient. So with that said, I want to pull this video now. 10 ways.
Many of us who have mixed race or mixed history have at one point or another encountered the question, what are you? And I hope that we can move from what are you to how do you identify, or what groups do you identify with? Like a multiplicity or a plurality of identities. What languages do you speak? What places do you call home? Who is your family? Those are questions that I think are more inviting than what are you?
Pretty powerful what she was saying, to really just kind of personalize and humanize the questions that we're asking in a way that's warm and inviting. I think inviting was the key word there. So I'm glad we were able to look at that. Now I want to share it again because I want to go back to and I it's my hope that we will continue to empower student voice. Long story short, again, we've got to get to know our students. We have to want to know them, right? Ask those questions. Who are you? And tell me more about it. Encourage underengaged voices, appreciate and lift underrepresented voices, making our lessons personally relevant, giving students more time for processing, allowing creative expression, creating or stretching the imagination, nurturing curiosity, and engaging in leadership and providing loving feedback for our kids, because I'm telling you, they're with us more than they are with their families. So, I think at the end of the day, as educators, we know we have to hold ourselves accountable as to how we are empowering student voices and how we're reaching everyone, because a principal's not going to fall for the excuse of, oh, well, Johnny just doesn't want to learn, or Johnny just can't do math, because we all know all students can learn and all students can do math. So with that said, I'm so happy that I was able to join you on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. And I would love to hear any stories that you have of how you've empowered student voices, and any questions you might have from this podcast as to, next steps and what else you're looking for as to how you can, do better in your role as a rock star teacher or leader and empowering student voices. So thanks so much for letting me share. I'm going to share again with you guys my social media information and how you can get in touch with me so that you can follow up for, whatever you need from me. So again, my social media information for you guys is Miss India White for Facebook, LinkedIn for the LinkedIn is the India White, Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach, Instagram is Indie238, YouTube is India White 123, TikTok is Dr. India White. So those are my YouTube channels. And again, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White, it will be featured on X Factor EDU, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph, and it can be found on Spotify. Also, if you are looking to find more information from me, feel free to check out my website, www.india-white.com, for books, blogs, and to schedule me for your next speaking or coaching event. I am going to be here for you. I want to make sure that you are doing all that you can to help support your students and your teachers in any way possible. And so I'm here for you. Now, with that said, thank you so much for joining the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Take care.